Okay, anybody new on the call? We've got a chance to introduce yourself to the crowd, tell us who you are, where you're from, and you can drop your information in the chat. We'll share it out afterwards. I'm going to call on Ash first because
Yeah,
I know he's new.
yeah. This is my first time being here. I spoke to John a while back. John, great to see
Hey,
you.
Ash. Yeah, great to see you too, man. How's it going?
Going great. Yeah, I think been really busy, but great to be here. I work on talent marketplace software. We help staffing companies build their own talent marketplaces. Yeah. So
Finally,
Well,
and best of luck.
thank you. I need that.
Chris.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Redvansky. I'm going to try to put my hand down while I'm talking here, and I'm not going to be successful. I don't know where that thing is. There it goes. Hello, everybody. And yes, I'm Chris, and I am within the staffing and analytics space. Or staffing analytics space. I was with a larger managed services provider and vendor management system for more than a decade. And now I am out on my own, bringing some really awesome Power BI dashboards to in-house managed services programs and also smaller MSPs that are looking to grow and deliver some really great analytics to their clients. So thank you. And I'm outside Philadelphia, and I have an awesome background.
Yeah, no doubt. Purple, right? I love it. Purple bricks.
Absolutely.
That's super cool.
Feel free to drop all your information in the chat, and we'll share it later. Anybody else new on the call or hasn't been here in a long time and would like to reintroduce themselves to the crowd?
I am new. I can go.
Yeah.
So it's Layla. Nice to meet you all. I work at Team Lift, and we assess skills automatically using AI. We work with staffing agencies and talent marketplaces to increase things like conversion rates and decrease time to match people to open positions. Also work with enterprises to optimize workforce allocation. So yeah, I'm happy to be here. Nice to meet you all.
Welcome. All right. Anybody else?
Yeah, I can go. So Alistair McKenzie, or Ali, so based here in Glasgow, Scotland, working with Rich Wilson at Gigged AI, so AI-driven talent platform. Just joined actually at the start of October, so here to learn as much as I can from the rest of you.
All right. Welcome.
Welcome. Yeah.
Cheers.
Anybody else?
And go.
Okay.
I'm Gabrielle. I'm at a pre-launch startup that is working to build a product that will help businesses of one handle their taxes, their bookkeeping, ultimately their HR needs, retirement planning needs, almost like a freelancer backpack that they will, with all the back office services that they can carry with them from job to job.
Called Freelancer Backpack because I like that name.
It's not, but yeah, it is a fun name.
Yeah.
Gabrielle, I'm stoked to get some time with you to talk to, and thanks for joining the call. I know we've got something on the schedule. Yeah, totally.
Gabrielle, can I ask you a question? As you think about that, one of the things that I've been wondering is, just as quick news, John and Steve know this. I finally quit Deloitte, and I have no clue what I'll do, but I might start another company, could do consulting, could go join another company and take another job. All options are open. But what I'm trying to figure out in the interim is a bunch of services that I kind of like so used to as an employee that I just don't have access to. Like, for example, like we have a bunch of brand possible. It's like, for example, we have a bunch of research databases that we use. And I spoke to 3 of them today. None of them serve anybody that is not an enterprise. Right? It feels like there's an opportunity for some kind of a group purchasing organization of sorts where you group all the freelancers, create some, and then buy that service as if you're an enterprise. It's no different. Have you heard that? Is that like, it feels like there's an enterprise silo of services and there's a freelance silo of services. but is there a way to like bridge the gap between the two?
It's so interesting. We have considered that. It's not today the core of what we're building, because we're really focused on taxes and S corps and ways for freelancers to save money in their taxes, automate those back office services that you get when you're a W-2 employee automatically by, just getting a paycheck and a pay stub. Those are additional add-ons that we have talked about. There is a company, actually a competitor of ours, who I talked to this past week, who are starting to play with those group buying services. I think it's a really interesting question. We will start group buying with health insurance and health benefits, because it's such a big challenge for folks and an enormous tax advantage if you buy that through your corporation and take the tax deduction. But there are many professional services like that, databases, software licenses that you could do a group buying program with.
Great stuff.
It's a great idea.
Yeah.
Did we give everyone a chance to introduce themselves?
I'll go.
right.
Apologies for not having my camera on. This is the first time I've actually been able to join one of these. My name's Sarah Duran, and I am a business coach who works directly with freelancers. So I heard about y'all through some partnerships I have with places like the Indie List, Uncompany, agencies like that. And I've been following this work super closely because I'm very, very invested in the future of work for all of the individuals I work with, and also thinking about how to get freelancers more of the professional development support that they need. And so I'm just excited to be here and learn from y'all.
I can go next. My name is Eric Swanson. I'm from Boulder and a good friend of John Windsor. Since John and I have been talking about this for a couple of years, he had me pre-read Open Talent that he wrote with Jen, and it's a fantastic book. And I'm fascinated with the concept because you have this paradox of so many people being unemployed, and the employer is really looking for good people. And I think it's hard to make the shift, but I want to learn as much as I can. My space, I really work with a lot of nonprofits. I had a group of pretty big churches, they're called mega churches, in a couple of weeks ago. And they have common problems to solve. And yet they only look to themselves to solve them. And what if we could create some type of idea exchange with solving the same problems that everybody has to solve for in churches: how to attract people, get people, keep people, grow people, then that they actually become multipliers of the mission. And we're talking good church. We're not talking about goofy churches. So I think it's a fantastic thing. But I think, and part of it, Steve, I'm glad you're on the call. We interact a little bit with email, but how to set up more of a system like NASA has. So they have their internal talent cloud. They have their outside challenges and tests, and then their external talent cloud. And I just think it's, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And it's just so obvious, right, Steve? I mean, just sort of like you're thinking, why doesn't every business think, just have it as a thought experiment. How could we do this? If we were to do this, what might it look like? And I think there'd be a ton of breakthroughs.
Yeah, and what's great is we're seeing all the infrastructure pieces start to come in here with benefits and coaching, and I really love it. It's great.
It's awesome. Thanks for being here, Eric.
Great being here.
Always appreciate you.
I've listened to the last couple of calls, and I'd run to the doctor and pick up some medication. Otherwise, I'd be on time.
Well, I'm really stoked for today. I don't know. Should we jump to that, Brandon?
Yeah, let's do it. I think we're ready. One announcement. We have a new podcast we just released with Miles Everson, the CEO of MBO Partners. Really great conversation with Miles and John. I'll put it in the chat. And with that, back to you, John.
Yeah, so I'm really stoked to have McLean and from MBO and Steve King, who's always kind of our guru here in the community, always providing killer insights and information to talk about MBO's new State of Independence report. I found some of the longitudinal stuff really, really great, and as I told Miles when we got together for the podcast, it's just really gratifying to know that some people have been doing this work for a long time, and we can kind of see these these trends, you know, for a long time. The one, you know, figure that really heartened, you know, made me stoked when I read the report was, and Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the numbers guy, I'm the storyteller. But if I remember correctly, in 2012, 3% of the freelancers or independent workers that you surveyed use platforms, and today 40% use platforms. And so
Correct.
incredible gain. And I think that just speaks to exactly what you talked about, Steve, is like all these ancillary, really necessary, you know, products, whether it's coaching or it's services or it's infrastructure and you know, and platforms. And I know MBO has done a really, really good job of providing that. And sorry, Steve, I cut you off, but one other thing, I think to kick this off, McLean, I'd love, because I think one of the things that I found when I was talking to Miles is like, could you just start off by talking a little bit about MBO, because you guys play such a pivotal role and you guys have evolved in such a big way. I just found it really interesting, you know, when Miles described it, especially from his experience at Talent Exchange at PwC coming in. And anyway, I'd love to start there. But before we start, Steve, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, I was just agreeing with you. I didn't get cut off.
Okay.
and I will second all the love. Steve's the best. He's definitely the data guy. We could not do this without him. Literally, I think I call him 3 times a week to say, I don't think I know this number. Could you help me? So I too feel like I've taken an academic course after talking to Steve. So hey guys, I know I've seen several of you before, but lovely to see everybody again. McLean, I lead marketing at MBO, which includes our research with Steve. MBO is an interesting platform. We are a direct sourcing platform. So on the enterprise side, we say we help enterprises engage, scale, and optimize their independent workforce. But we started as a talent platform, helping people run their business. So we were founded in 1996 and began really as a way for people to have a back office service for their independent consultancies. And today we have about 80,000 independents on the platform. At some point in the early 2000s, the enterprises came to us and said, gosh, you guys are signing a lot of checks. What do you do? Can you work with the enterprise? And thus the enterprise arm of our business was born. And today we started as a compliance business, helping ensure that enterprises were engaging independents compliantly, expanded as the industry did into direct sourcing. And today we do the full scope of everything from compliance and direct sourcing through to what we would call workforce optimization. So helping enterprises sit and understand what their strategic workforce mix needs to be as they move into the future of work. Our CEO, obviously, is Miles Everson, who was the former CEO of PwC's consulting practice. And so what's really interesting is he did this at PwC. He did this with the Talent Exchange and articulated not just what their internal direct sourcing platform would look like, but what their mix would be, that they would have a 10% mandated minimum of independent contractors. And it really changed the numbers. It changed the way PwC was put together. And many of the other big four, many other enterprises have followed suit. So he has been with us for just over 4 years now, and really, pushed a lot of our clients and others in the space to see the same. So really excited because this data today that we'll talk about just underscores this trend moving in the market. And we have a lot of other enterprise data we've done this year that says not only are independents moving this way, but enterprises are too. So I won't take away from the data. I'll let Steve go ahead and get started if you're okay with that, John.
Yeah, let's do it. Thanks a lot for bringing us up to speed. I mean, again, I'm so impressed with MBO. And I think one of the things that I love is that you've gone, you started with talent first and really helped them build their teams. And then, that business really well. And then really helping enterprises kind of, get connected through direct sourcing. It's also really gratifying to, one of the things I've loved in conversations with you and with Steve Rader and, Balaji, obviously, and then guys like Mike Morris, who are OGs, who've been in this for so long, and MBO has certainly been there. And so, again, I think the thing that I'm so fascinated with, and maybe Steve, as you talk, some of the kind of the longitudinal things that we're seeing, right, is really fascinating to me. So it would be great to kind of share some of that stuff. I know you always, drive such an interesting conversation, but we should just jump in.
All righty, thank you. And I will jump in, and let me share my screen. And as I'm doing that, I noticed Rich Wilson put in the text the chat about a SIA report, which I've read, and it's very good. So it's well worth looking at. And one of the interesting things that's in their report is MBO doesn't talk about this enough, but I guess I'm, as a consultant to them, I'm allowed to talk about it. They're the third largest platform according to SIA after Upwork and Fiverr. So in addition, come on, you can. I'm trying to get my. There it goes. Trying to get my screen to work. So anyway, take a look at that report. I really thought it was quite good. But we're not talking about that report. We're talking about the State of Independence report today, which is, as John said, it started in 2011, and we started working with MBO in late 2009 and did some internal work. And then in 2011, we started the State of Independence report. So this was the 13th year of it, and
lucky 13, Steve.
Yeah,
lucky
we 13. Have lots of longitudinal data, and we'll talk about that. Let me just start by saying one of the interesting things and it was just really, it's been good for the last couple of years from a research standpoint, is what we've seen is a real surge in the number of independent workers. And as you can see from the chart on the left, the total number of independent workers, the way we measure it, has grew about 89% from 2020 to 2023, continuing to grow well above average in 2023 itself. And this isn't just our data. If you look on the data on the right, that's the new business applications data from, it's called Business Formation Statistics from the US Census. It's really tax ID applications. But if you look at that, you'll see a very similar surge over that period in the number of applications. And then one of the other interesting pieces of this is if you go back to 2005 in the business applications data, that's the yellowish part of the graph. Those applications are applications that the census calls high propensity applications. And those are the ones that they expect to be employer businesses. So kind of classic small businesses and small firms in general. And then the bluish ones, the census basically refers to as applications other than high propensity. A great name if you ask me. But anyway, those are solopreneur applications. Those are the ones that the census suspects will not have employees anytime soon. And so when you look at that back at 2005, 2/3 of the applications came from employer small businesses. If you look at it today, 2/3 of the applications come from solopreneur businesses. And so we've seen both this surge and then this long-term shift away from, and not so much away from employer applications in the sense that those have grown too, but not nearly as much as the solopreneur applications have grown over the entire time period from 2005. And so we've seen, and so the single biggest finding for us for the last 3 years has been this surge. And it hasn't just been in overall. I mean, if you get under the hood a little bit to the groups that I think this group were most interested in, the number of full-time independents actually increased 91% from 20 to 23. And that was our first 3-year period where full-time independents grew faster than part-time. For the last decade or so, it's really been up until 2021, it was really part-time independence that was driving most of the growth in the independent workforce. Yes, full-time independents were also growing, but slower than part-time. And for the last 3 years, it's only a little higher, but particularly in 2023, the share of full-time independents grew 20%, and the part-timers only grew about 10%. And so we're starting to see full-timers come in a greater way, and we'll talk about why in a couple of minutes. And then, of course, one of our favorite charts is the high-income group, because that shows sort of higher earning professionals joining. And we've seen a 53% growth in those numbers. And so again, a surge. And when I say surge, it's really interesting. If you look at the trend line, since we've been doing this study, I've taken this chart on the right as the total number of independent workers. back to 2015, but just to fit it in better on the chart. But it's true if you go back to 2011. The trend line has been running at about 2.8% per year growth. And over the last 3 years, that growth is 10x what the traditional trend line has been. So that's a pretty fundamental shift. And it's really interesting if you compare it to the chart on the right. During the pandemic, and that's the share of US retail spending, e-commerce, online retail spending. The chart on the left, during the pandemic, if you remember, we were all talking about how the pandemic was going to increase the share, e-commerce by 10 years. That was the common thing. It's going to be just explode. And of course it did shoot up, but guess what? It's reverted back to its pre-pandemic trend line. And a lot of the trends that we follow have done the same thing, whether it's dining out, home delivery of food, attendance at sporting events. Most of the consumer trends have actually drifted back to their pre-pandemic trend line. Exceptions include work from home and things related to remote work, which are also we find that correlates with the number of U.S. independent workers, and so they come in together. But the key thing here is the total number of independent workers appears to have taken a step change. Now, we're hesitant to call a step change and a fundamental shift with just a couple years data. But if this continues, and our expectation is the growth rate will slow over the next couple of years, the number of U.S. independents has gotten very large, and so it's harder to grow. And there's a number of other factors. So we do think it will slow, but we do think we've seen a fundamental shift, and that independent work will become much more popular and numerous and with more people in the next few years and over the next 10 years than it has in the past. And
we could point to a couple of other trends there, Steve, that I would say indicate the intent to continue. You could point to some data from the BLS that shows declining U.S. employee tenure. So your full-time workforce is no longer working as long at any one employer as they were. We're looking at 2.7 years for our younger millennials, and I think 1.8 for our Gen Zs. So they're certainly hopping around. We're looking at declining population growth, retirees who may pick up independent work after they leave the full-time workforce. So I would add in absolutely that we intend to see this level off, but Miles talked about it nicely in the podcast with John. We're in a human capital scarcity issue. And as we see from a lot of the sentiment data that you'll show in a minute, independents are broadly happier and healthier and wealthier than the population at large. So without using data, I'm going to say it stands to reason that it will finish or continue to go up, whether it levels off or not.
Yes, absolutely.
I'm more comfortable making a happy prediction than Steve, because he wants to rely on the data.
Yeah, and one thing also that I forgot to mention, please put your questions into the chat, and we're
getting a couple here, Steve. David Arenthal did ask about the demographics of the trend line independent gap. I don't know if we showed the slide today, but we're definitely seeing that jump in the millennials, Gen Zs, but the X's and the boomers are holding strong. So I was sort of surprised that despite the fact that your younger workers are leading this jump, you definitely do have a nice mix of all ages. So it's hard to say that there's any one group that hates independence. They're all continuing to proceed along. But would you add anything to that one, Steve?
Yeah, it's really more. We found it's really more life cycle than age. Meaning when you're young, you don't necessarily have the skills or the networks or the capabilities of becoming independent. And so that you're relatively few. As you get older, the groups tend to be larger. It's interesting that there was a report out today that I saw that says that Gen Z will pass boomers next year in terms of full-time employment, but they're about 19%, whereas boomers are, well, they're actually in the same range, aren't they? So they may pass 19. Boomers in independent work also, but it's more life cycle. But everybody is participating, whether you're Gen Z all the way up to boomers, and the boomers are hanging in there because so many of them are working part-time and full-time past traditional retirement age, like me. So let me, what we're going to talk about today is what's driving that surge. And it's really all three things. It's supply and demand. And John mentioned what we call enablement, which is the expanding support network of goods and services and products for independent workers. And we think the term flywheel, that's a big old flywheel in an old steam engine staring at you. We think the term flywheel is overused, and we chose not to use it in our reports, but there is a flywheel happening here. And so it's kind of interesting to look at that. Let's start with sort of the supply of independent workers. And at a fundamental level, more people want to do independent work. And as McLean mentioned, the top three data points are around what we call the three myths, which is when we first started studying this many years ago, everyone told us, no, independent workers, they don't want to do it. They didn't choose it. They had to do it. They're not happy with it. And they're going to get a traditional job as soon as you can. So I always put these data into all of our reports and studies because it's important to continue to debunk the three myths. In fact, most choose it, most are happy with it, and most plan to continue as independent workers. But on top of that, as McLean mentioned, 87% report they're actually happier than if they had a traditional job, and 78% say they report they're healthier than if they had a traditional job. And so you're seeing a pretty high satisfaction level. Now, I always make the point that I don't want to understate the challenges, and there is a large group in the 20 to 25% range of people that frankly aren't very happy with it, but the majority very much happy with it. And what we've seen lately is that workers are, since the pandemic, workers are basically changing their views on work and its role in their lives. And we've heard a lot about that, things like the Great Resignation and girl boss and lazy girl, all of the things that you hear. But at a fundamental level, you can see it in this data. And the red is the traditional workers. And I want to point out a couple of the points in there. I always wanted to be my own boss. We go back to 2019 and it was less than half. And now amongst people with traditional jobs, traditional job holders, it's up to 61%. And then the flexibility is more important than making the most money. You see that has now gone from 45 to 55. And the net result of this is we asked people with traditional jobs, would they rather have a traditional job or work as an independent worker of some sort? And the share, it dropped 7 points, which is a significant number given the size of people with traditional jobs. And so at a fundamental level, we are seeing this change happen where people are saying, I want more work-life balance, I want more independence. And because of that, fewer are saying they want a traditional job. And one of the big reasons for that is risk and security has changed. And I think we've talked about this in this here before, but just as a quick summary, more and more traditional workers are saying working independently is less risky than permanent employment. You can see it in the independents, which is the top set of numbers. Their share, they're saying that they feel more secure working independently is basically doubled since we've started this little more than doubled since we've started this study in 2011 from 32% to 67%. And very consistently, they tell us the reasons are they have multiple sources of income, so it's hard for them to lose all of their income at once. And then the other thing they tell us is traditional jobs are much more risky than they used to be. And so a little bit of this is nothing's good or bad by comparison. In comparison, the independents tell us is that they don't think traditional jobs are very secure anymore. And then traditional workers, if you look, we first asked this question in 2018. It's almost doubled in terms of the share that says working independently is less risky, and it's up to a third of the workforce. So you're really seeing a shift in how security is viewed, risk and security. And that's always been one of the biggest sellers of traditional jobs. And one of the biggest value propositions. So as people see traditional jobs being less secure, they say to themselves, I may as well go independent and have the freedom and flexibility because both are risky But if I can get a diversified client base or revenue base, income base, then suddenly I'm less risky. And then our all-time favorite survey question is the one at the bottom. More of my friends are working independently. And you can see that traditional workers, less, 1 in 5 said that more of my friends working independently in 2018. This data goes back a bit further, and it was about 14% in 2012 when we first asked this question. And for independents, it was about 30%. And that's grown substantially to where it's above 4 and 10 for both groups. And one of the things that's true with any trend is the more people are familiar with something and they're comfortable with, they become more comfortable with it, and they're more likely to embrace it. And so this survey question has been used across many types of trends, and it's basically a pro-cyclical thing. The more people that say they're aware of something, the more people that are willing to do it. And so we've fundamentally just seen this shift happen in how people view independent work. And
Steve, I want to pause because we've got a couple questions that on the past data set might be good to answer while we're looking at that before we move we move over to the Thrive questions. The one is how are these independent workers getting healthcare, which we've covered in the past, but we didn't hit it in this year's study. We find that many of them are going to the exchanges. They're using the open marketplaces, or they're getting it through their spouse who has a traditional job, which is why independence is highly correlated by life stage. What we see is, of course, you have to have a specific risk tolerance to be an independent, but the concerns over healthcare are much less for the independents themselves than we think they might be. And we'd actually done quite a bit of digging at MBO into whether healthcare was an issue. And it seems that as the exchanges get better and the access to healthcare on the open market becomes more and more available, that it becomes less and less of a challenge for people, particularly as premiums with your employer rise. Is there anything you want to add to that particular question, Steve?
Yeah, just the ACC was a game changer in 2011 about the ACA, Obamacare. In 2011, about 64% of independent workers had health insurance. 2023, it's up to about 86 or 87%. And a lot of that is just the Affordable Care Act and the exchanges. But as McLean mentioned, there are other ways that are going at it. I mean, one of the things that we find really interesting is job lock, benefit job lock, including health insurance, is listed as one of the key reasons people don't become independent. But when you actually dig in under the hood in interviews, you start to hear risk profile is a bigger issue. They're not willing to take the risk. And it's much easier to say, well, I'm not going to do it because I'm not going to have benefits, than saying I'm not going to do it because it's too risky. And so we've always felt job lock's overrated and overstated. And I can go into more detail on that, but McLean's answer was a good one for that.
Sufficient.
But take that offline, because that's a wonky thing we can take offline.
Yeah, we have a couple more questions that are great at this time here. So Balaji's asking which companies rode the wave just because of the massive increase in 3 years in growth of independence, but also a good one, which is how does this square with the reports that employees are staying and not quitting because the voluntary turnover rate is low and the overhire and fire rate is high.
Sí. Listo, bajando.
Yeah, the quits rate is low, but it took a while to come down, and so these people are shifting, and so the quits rate's not so low that it's had an impact yet on this. We'll have to wait and see as that data comes forward more. I mean, if you look at the increasing numbers. The other thing is, and that's why the full-time one is so interesting, because that would be the one to watch. The part-time one, people can become part-time without quitting. And so they're still almost 2/3 of the total numbers. So the numbers can increase even while the quits rates stay low. And what was the other part of the question?
It was asking which companies, and I can take this one from the MBO perspective, which is to say we've certainly seen large growth in the independents working on our professional services firms. We work primarily across 6 verticals. So we've got the federal space, tech, healthcare, consumer goods and services, professional services, and we really have seen growth in all sectors. So I would say that this is certainly not limited to any one industry, even financial services that have been historically reluctant to say that they use independence. But those with high skill, high in demand skills have been more adept at tapping into particularly this facet of the workforce that we talk about. And then
I think my question
David,
was a little different, McLean. I think my question was, if you think about the companies that operate in the space, whether you take the Upworks of the world or any of the companies in the report that Rich just shared, none of them increased their revenues anywhere close to the huge spike that we are seeing. Like, I don't know where all of that money actually went to. Of course, it went to the independents, but it doesn't seem like the sector actually made that money. So there's some gap in how the companies perform that operate in this space versus the number of independents. Why is that?
Well, actually, 2021 and 2022 was pretty good for both Fiverr and Upwork, although lower than the growth rates we're reporting, but not far off from the growth rate, roughly the same growth rates as we're reporting for full timers. 2023, we've shown growth is slowing, and the companies, I'll just use Upwork and Fiverr because they report publicly, their business has definitely slowed down. They're both saying they're going to grow about 10% for the year right now. And these numbers are up about 14% this year overall. And so actually they're not far off in terms of the publicly reported numbers, but I do agree that a lot of the companies that are participate in here are undergrowing. Now we also get lots of reports of companies that are overgrowing, but I do think a lot of this is a function of how big and how fast the full-time employment is versus the overall numbers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
David had one more question, which is also interesting about the demand and the supply. Is there going to be more difficulty finding clients and downward pressure on fees now in the future if this trend continues? So I can answer this from what we see at MBO. No, the high earners, the high skilled independents are absolutely commanding the same, if not higher fees than they were before. And that tends to go up, particularly in areas where there's more demand than there is supply. Of course, if you flip it and you have more supply than demand, you're going to get rate pressures. But by and large, we're not seeing it in the really high skilled workforce area. That said, of course, it's important as an independent to ensure that your rates aren't significantly higher or lower than market. However, if we look at the enterprise data on use of independent labor, almost all enterprises are saying they plan to increase their use of independent labor. So I don't see the supply-demand pipeline flipping at any time in the near future.
Oh, McLean, does that mean we can raise our prices?
I think when I get the report, it goes up most years. The cost of surveying goes up. So yeah, of course, Steve.
Yeah. So the 100K people sort of follow the same trend lines. But 2 points I wanted to point out was the desire for greater work-life flexibility. Historically, that hasn't been as true for the 100K people. As you can see, they've tended to focus more on income and less on flexibility, and that's turned around in the last 3 years. And then left a job I was unhappy with. And that one I find really interesting because on average, people are pretty happy with their jobs today, but they continue to leave. And I think it's the work-life flexibility that's driving that. And so when you net all this out, what we ask a question of any of traditional job holders, are they planning to become an independent worker? And that 13% number was the 2012 to 2019 average. But more importantly, it was almost always somewhere between 12.4 or 12.5 and 13.5. I mean, it's almost an economic identity up until the pandemic. And since then, it's shifted to 17%, which is a big shift given how stable that number was. And that's because more people are interested in this. And there's a global entrepreneurship monitor study out of Babson College that has they asked the question a different way, but it has almost exactly the same results. They got about 14% from 2012 to 2019, and they're up to 18%. So there's definitely increased interest in becoming independent. And of course, the demand is growing. And this group, I think, knows that, but the chart on the left comes from Ardent Partners, and it's a fairly broad definition of contingent talent, but they just have had for as long as we've been studying independent work, they've also been looking at contingent work, and it's constantly gone up. And then the chart on the right is a recent study we did with MBO Partners, and this was asking people more specifically about freelancers and independent workers, and less about outsourcing and such. And we're seeing there a steady increase. So we have supply growing up, we have demand growing up, and then what John talked about earlier is there's just a growing array of products and services and technologies that's making it easier and cheaper to become an independent, and making it safer to become an independent. And this is the data that John mentioned. 3% used an online platform. This was independent workers who tell us that they provide services to businesses in this case, and it's up to 41%. They also use it more intensively than they had going back even a couple of years. By that, I mean they get more of their business from it. It's still more of a secondary source of business for most, but even the share that is, even the share that's doing it full, getting most of their business has grown quite a bit. And of course, word of mouth is still important, but one of the big shifts that also happened during the pandemic is online methods for securing work past word of mouth, which, when we go back 81% in 2015, if I go back to 2011, it's 87% of the people would say that word of mouth was one of their top 3 methods, and about half said it was their top method. And now we're at the point where online methods, and the big rise is both the marketplaces, but also e-commerce, influencer marketing, social selling, creator economy, number of reasons why that's bumped up. But if you put them together now, online methods are listed by 38% of their top, and word of mouth's only 34%. I'll also point out former employer has dropped dramatically over that time frame, and I think people aren't spending as much time in jobs, and so I think they have less opportunity to, and also turnover of their companies. So a major shift in how people are securing work. I just wanted to, because we're running out of time, just touch on artificial intelligence, and fundamentally, when we asked people, we asked independent workers, everyone said they knew it. Almost everyone said they had tried it. 38% said they were using it regularly, and this survey was fielded in July, and I find that very hard to believe. But you often get false positives when asking questions that are aspirational or hot in the news and everything. But at a fundamental level, they don't think they're going to be replaced by it. And surprisingly small numbers at that point thought it would complement their work. We're in the midst of an AI project right now, and that's what we're seeing: complementary use. We're seeing productivity gains, depending upon what it is, in the 18 to 25% range amongst those that are actively using it. We'll have more on this topic in the future when we finish our study.
Yeah, we'll be doing, this will be Q1 of 2024, so really excited about it. It looks like there's a couple of questions, but links on earning rate average for each category. I know our income levels discussion is always Steve's least favorite, it's the least accurate, but you want to hit on income by area here, Steve?
I don't like income data in a survey because people lie and or people don't know. And some say higher and some say I don't know. So anyway, survey data on income shouldn't be trusted. If you look at the median income, it's slightly lower than the median income for America overall. If you look at it by different cohorts, the 100K plus group is also a little smaller than overall, but it sort of stays the same that way. I'm not sure what Link was specifically interested in, but at a broad level, the income's slightly lower than those with traditional jobs, pretty much across all cohorts.
And my thoughts on that is a suspicion that there is this rising increase of availability of freelancers, but they're within a certain age group, they're earning a certain income, they're going more traditional to the platforms and almost replicating this idea of having a stable job, but not actually having a traditional job, but that Fiverr or that one source of income is their income. And then it's this kind of middle area when they want to increase their price. If they're not, they're going independent and trying to find that work, but now the business enterprise is paying less because they can go through platforms where people can get cheaper and less skilled. And so I'm seeing this kind of flux in the data, and I'm interested to see where that kind of baseline income is going to fall, like coming out of this year going into next, as we expand open talent to include more areas beyond digital marketing and creator economy and that kind of stuff, to include other forms of labor. So it's interesting. Thank you for your work.
We've talked about a race to the bottom for as long as I've been working on this. And so far, there's really not any data supporting the race to the bottom at a high level. I mean, you can do a lot of individual examples of it, but when you aggregate the data up, that race to the bottom hasn't happened yet. I'm not, I've always thought that it may not happen, but certainly I'm open to the idea that it's happening. But we just haven't seen it in the data overall, and we haven't seen it in the data in the study. And I think part of it is, so many are still getting their business traditionally through word of mouth, through SOW contracts and so forth, particularly the full timers. And the platforms may result in a fall, but we haven't seen it yet.
Well, thanks for having us, guys.
This is great. No, McLean and Steve, as always, is such good stuff, and really, really appreciate you guys being here. I find it always fascinating. It's nice to have this conversation going for a few years now, because, kind of got a nice rhythm and always great data here that everybody can use. So certainly we'll make sure we share this and get it out to everybody. And let's have you guys back on when we do this AI. Is that in the spring you guys are doing this study?
We're gonna go with mid Q1 probably.
Mid Q1. Okay, that sounds good.
We'll be finishing that. That'd be great. And if anybody wants to see the full report, it's on MBO's site. If you just Google MBO SOI, it'll pop up.
Excellent. Make sure you follow Steve. Steve's super active on LinkedIn and always has great insights. I kind of top of the morning, I'm always following Steve, and he helps me get my day going as far as good stuff to look at. So thanks so much, guys, and love you guys as a group. And it's always great to kind of see the progress. It's lots of good continued momentum for the marketplace, and still lots of stuff we got to figure out together. But thank you all, and we'll talk to you guys soon.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Good one.